Okay, so as a prerequisite for the finite volume and the finite difference C++ programming course, I actually uh, put it in requirements that C++ fundamentals or basics is required. However, some students are finding it a bit hard to follow the CFD coding part in C++. So I decided to make a video lesson or lessons for some uh, assistance with this particular problem. So if you are familiar with C++, you can just skip this entire section. So this will be our lesson 1. I've already gone and created a CPP file called lesson 1. In this lesson we will be lesson 1. Let me just zoom in a bit. Right, so lesson 1 will be the basics of C++, which is the most fundamental basics. Okay, so since we are going to follow C++ standard and not C standard, be using the most common library or header file called IO stream, which is input output stream, right? So there we go. And then we write our main function, which we say int main, and then inside the curly brackets we write a function. Okay, so because it's the function is defined as an int, we need to return something, and we will return a null or 0, right? So now if I write cout hello world and then end this line, will this program compile or not? So if I build up, most likely get an error saying that cout was not declared in this scope, right? So this is because cout is within a namespace called std, which I'm guessing is stands for standard. So standard namespace, and now this should work, right? So if we run this, we have hello world. So this is probably the most basic C++ program that you can write, and it should be done at the start of every project, if you are especially if you're new to C++, just to make sure that everything is working fine, including the compiler. So next we move on to something called the basic data types that we'll be using. So we start with something called an integer, which we can say my integer is equal to 1. So if you write int my integer is equal to 1.0, this is probably wrong, because integers are supposed to be whole numbers. Now there is another thing you can do. You can declare unsigned integers, so just telling the compiler that this integer will never have a sign. Say for example -2 is wrong because it should not have a sign. 2 is okay. And on the other hand, if you think that your integer is definitely going to be signed, you can also declare my signed integer is equal to -10 or something like that, right? So signed and unsigned. Okay, now let's just comment these by using 2 backslashes. Okay, now the next data type that we most commonly use is called floats. So floats have more precision or more decimal places than an integer. Say my float is equal to 1.0, and sometimes my float 2 is denoted by an F at the end, saying that this is a float, right? So both are okay, both are correct. Even capital F should work, I believe. The next is obviously a double, which probably should have more precision than a float. So when I say precision, what I mean is how many significant figures can be added after uh, the decimal place or the dot. Right, so double, my double is equal to 1.02. Also, you can declare a long double, which is much more significant figures than a double. So a long double, my long double is equal to 1.0 L. You can even leave it at 1.0, but L is also okay, saying that it's a long number, right? So comment that out as well. The next thing that we most likely going to use is called a char, although I don't think I have used much of this in the actual project CFD coding. However, you can declare a char with these commas. So inside we can say S. So a char is one character. So this is a char, right? So it's a character. Now next we have string. But in order to use string, we actually have to include a header file called string, right? So this is giving us access to string. Also, you should note that actually without this using namespace std, we cannot access string like this. We probably have to write std and then string, right? But because I have included the namespace std, I can just access it by just writing string. My string is equal to, so string is collection of characters, and even can be numbers or integers, whatever you may have, even words. So this is an apple, this is still a string, right? Okay, so next thing we can do is, now that we have declared the main data types we use, integers, floats, doubles, characters, let's just delete these extra spaces just to make it a bit more clean. And also let's just align everything to make sure that we have a nice looking file at the end, right? So there we go, and we can put these guys here. Okay, so let's say, so this is a string. Okay, so those are the basic data types. Now let's try to use the cout. So when you want to print something on screen, you use cout and you write, let's say let's say what integer value does a hold, right? So we are asking a question to the user of the program, which means we can declare a variable called a. Now cout printouts the message, but we need something to get the value back, so we can say to the program with this force operator and say that we want whatever the user input is a cin, which will be equal to the integer a. So let's build and run this program. So right, so there's two a's I have declared. Okay, it's a char here, right? So let's say some integer. What value should some integer hold? Okay, let's build and run. So if I say 10, it should work fine. So press any key to continue. Now there's also a couple of useful functions or which we can use. For example, this is a, and then we print out a, which is a char, and then we print out this some integer and some integer, right? So now we want to give a tab spacing, so what we use is comma backslash t, right? And then we print out some integer, which is of course some integer, and then also we want to go to a new line, so we use comma backslash n, and then we say some integer plus 2, right? So some integer plus 2, and then we end the line. Let's see if this will work. Right, expected primary expression. All right, I have two of these arrow backward arrow operators just next to each other, so we'll then run again. Okay, so let's say 100, some integer value. Now notice this is first our character A, and then some integer, and then it gives a spacing equal to a tab, and now we have 100, and then it goes to a new line, some integer plus 2, 102. So this is exactly what we asked the program to do. So give a normal spacing here with A, and then give a tab between some integer, and then give a new line. These are quite useful when you're actually printing stuff to files and stuff like that. Now before I end this lesson, there's also another library which, if you're using C style programming, called stdio, which is standard input output library. If you include that, you should be able to access some function called printf, and then you can print whatever that you want to do, right? If you want to go with that style, you could just look it up. Just look up printf function and then stdio, so stdio.h for C style, right? Okay, so in the next lesson, hopefully we will learn something new, and hope you enjoy these small video lessons.